Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Revati Kumar, your host for this session. Before we start, a quick note. If you have any other questions during the session, please write in the chat. Our experts will answer you via email. We're at a point where data is no longer just supporting decisions, it's beginning to make them. From personalized recommendations to autonomous purchasing journeys, commerce is evolving into a more intelligent, self-operating ecosystem. Today, we'll explore how organizations are moving beyond analytics to AI-driven, real-time decision-making, and what that means for business growth, customer experience, and operational efficiency. To help us explore this topic in depth, we have someone who brings both practical experience and a strong point of view. It's my pleasure to introduce Ashwin Shinde, Senior Data Architect at Hexacorp. Thank you so much for being here, Ashwin. Over to you.
Thank you, Reti. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So, I really appreciate you taking the time to join today. So, before we get into this topic, I want to start with a simple observation. That most organizations today have more data than ever before, more dashboards, more reports, and even more tools. But if you ask a very simple question, are we making better decisions faster? In most cases, the answer is no. And I want you to think about your own organization for a second. How long does it take to make a pricing decision? How long does it take to react to customers' behavior? Or even how long does it take to act on insights? That gap between having data and actually acting on it is what we are going to talk about today. Because the next phase of commerce is not about having more data, it's about making decisions in real time and eventually letting systems take those decisions for us. And that shift from insights to decisions to agentic execution is what we call data driven agentic commerce. So let me make this real, not theoretical. Okay. So customer comes to a website, browses a few products, spends some time comparing the options, adds one item to the cart, and then leaves. Now I want you to think about this. What happens next? In most companies, nothing immediate. The data gets captured, it goes into your system, maybe processed later. Maybe someone looks at a report tomorrow. Maybe a campaign runs after that. So let me give you a real example. We worked with a retail client where a card abandonment triggers were batch driven. So emails were going out 24 hours later. The conversation rate, almost zero. Because by the time we reached the customer, they had already bought from somewhere else. Now let's flip this. So what should happen instead? In that exact moment, the system should evaluate who is the customer, what is their intent, what is the margin, what is the inventory situation, and then decide, do I offer a discount? Do I recommend something else? Or do I trigger a notification? Right then, that gap between a decision should happen. And when it eventually happens, it's where revenue is lost. And this is exactly what this slice represents. Customers expect real time experiences, but internal decisions are still delayed. And all the data we have invested in is not translating into outcomes. So we are at an inflection point. But the challenge is no longer data, it is the decision speed. And that's the shift we'll be exploring next. So before we go into deeper into this, let me quickly walk you through how we'll approach this session. We'll break this into four simple parts. First, we'll look at how decision making in commerce is evolving. Second, we'll understand what autonomous or agentic commerce actually means, and not just the terminology of it. Third, we'll look at where the real business value is coming from and how organizations are actually benefiting from this shift. And finally, we'll talk about how you can start in a practical way within your own organization. Now, as we go through this, think about your own organization and try to identify where decisions are getting delayed today. Because by the end of this session, if you can walk away with even one decision that you can improve, this session would have done its job. So, with that, let's go into the core problem of it. Let's now talk about the core problem. So, more enterprises today are not decision ready, and this shows up in very consistent ways. First, the data is fragmented. It exists across multiple systems: ERP, CRM, e commerce, supply chain, and none of it is truly connected in real time, which means there is no complete view when a decision needs to be made. Second, the insights are generated, but they are not acted upon. They sit somewhere in your dashboards, in your reports, and they depend on someone to interpret them and then decide. Thirdly, the decisions are still manual. They go through layers: approvals, validations, dependencies, and every step adds more delay. And finally, when the decisions are made, they don't scale in real time. They're applied in batches or in limited scenarios, not across the entire organization or the business. So let me make this very real. Consider a client where even a simple pricing change requires multiple approvals. So by the time the change went live, the competitor had already changed his price. So the system was always reacting, it was never leading. And when this happens at scale across pricing, across inventory, or across customer experiences, the impact is significant. Revenue leakages, operational inefficiencies, and inconsistent customers' behavior. So, just to summarize this is not a data problem anymore. This is not even an insight problem. This is a decision execution problem. And that's the gap we need to solve. So now that we have understood the problem, let's take a step back for a moment and look at how things are changing. Traditionally, organizations have operated in a very structured way. Data is collected, reports are generated, insights are created, and then decisions are made. This typically happens periodically, daily, sometimes even weekly or monthly, which means decisions are always reacting to what has already been happened. Now compare that to how leading organizations are operating today. So instead of periodic reporting, they operate on continuous intelligence. Instead of reactive decisions, they make predictive decisions. Instead of human led execution, they enable AI driven execution. And instead of siloed systems, they build connected ecosystems. Now, this is a very important shift because both types of organization have access to data. Both of them can generate insights, but only one can act in time. And that's where the competitive advantage is. It's no longer about who has more data or who has better dashboards. It is about who can execute decisions faster and at scale. So think about something very simple. Suppose if a competitor changes price instantly and you take a few hours, you're already lost in that moment. So the shift we are seeing is from insight-led organizations to action-led organizations. And that's the foundation for what we call agentic commerce. So now let's understand what this actually looks in practice. What does it mean to move from analysis to agentic action? It really comes down to four steps: analyze, decide, act, and learn. Now, this may sound simple, but the difference is in how fast and how continuously these steps happen. So, let's start with analyze, which is the very first step. In traditional systems, analysis happens periodically based on reports, based on batches of data. But in this model, data is analyzed continuously in real time and in context, which means you're not looking at yesterday's behavior, you're looking to what is happening right now. Next is the decide step. This is where intelligence comes in. So instead of waiting for human intervention, the system evaluates different signals and make a decision in real time. And this decision is not generic, it is contextual. Then comes the act part of it. And this is where most organizations struggle. Because even if the decision is clear, the execution is delayed. But in this model, action happens automatically across systems with no manual intervention. And finally, the learn step, which is equally important like the three others, because every action generates an outcome, and then outcome feedbacks into the system. So the next decision is better than the previous one. So let me bring all of this together with a simple example again. So customer, in this case, abandons a card. Now what happens in this model, the system analyzes customers' behavior, customers' purchase history, the session activity. Then it decides, should we offer a discount? Should we recommend something else? Or should we do nothing based on the margin and the context? Then it acts. It triggers that action immediately and then it learns, did the customer converted or not? And it improves the next decision for the next customer or the coming customers. Let's take another example just to clarify this. Inventory balancing. So demand increases in one region, whereas the inventory sits idle in the other region. So instead of waiting for a manual review, the system detects this, decides optimal redistribution, and executes it automatically. So what you are really building here is not just any automation, but a system that continuously analyzes, decides, acts, and learns without delay. And that is what enables agentic commerce. So now the natural question is, what does all of this actually deliver from a business perspective? Because at the end of the day, this is not just about data or AI, it's about the outcomes. So let's start with revenue. When decisions happen in real time, you move from static pricing to dynamic pricing. You move from campaigns to next best action for every customer or for every workflow what you're working with. And this is enabled by real-time signals and lightweight AI inference that can decide in that exact moment. Second, the operations. This is where most organizations feel the pain today. Too many manual steps, too many approvals, too much delay. With agentic decisioning, you orchestrate decisions across system and execute automatically, which means faster execution with less dependencies. Third, resources. And this is not just inventory, this is any resource. It can be a budget, capacity, people, infra. So instead of fixed allocation, you move to a demand driven decisions. that continuously rebalances based on the real time signals. And finally, the customers. This is where the impact becomes visible. Experiences becomes personalized, not based on segments, but based on the behavior. In that moment, the journeys adapt based on what the customer is doing right now. Now, the important thing to understand is these are not isolated improvements, they are connected. The system design is it improves revenue, reducing your cost, it optimizes your resources, and enhances customers' behavior at the same time. So, agentic decisions do not just optimize one particular area, they create compounding impact across the entire business. And that's where the real value is. So now let's make this practical again. We have talked about the problem. We have talked about how decisions are changing and what outcomes this can drive. Now the question is, where does this apply in your world? So let me ask you something. If you could fix one decision in your organization today, what would it be? Would it be pricing? Would it be personalization? Would it be operational decisions or resource allocation? Now think one level deeper. Why is that decision slow today? Is it because of your data? Is it because of the systems? Or is it because the decision process itself is not designed for real time? And in most cases, it's not the lack of data, it's not even the lack of tools, but it's the inability to execute decisions at the right time and at the right scale. And that's exactly the gap that agentic systems are solving. So they are not just analyzing, they're enabling action in the moment. So you think about this, don't think in terms of technology first, start with a decision that has high impact and has high frequency, because that's where the shift creates immediate value for you. Now let's talk about something very critical. None of this works without right data foundation, because at the end of the day, every decision is only as good as the data behind it. And this is where most organizations struggle, not because they don't have data, but because the data is not ready for decisions. In most cases, the data is delayed, it's fragmented, and it's not available at the moment a decision needs to be made. So, what needs to be changed? First, you need real time data ingestion, not batch processing, but continuous data flow. Second, you need a unified data layer so decisions are made on a consistent view. Third, you need governance because decisions depend on trust and consistency. And finally, you need a decision layer where logic and AI can operate in real time. And this is something we see very often. Organizations invest heavily in data platform, but decisions are still delayed because the decision layer is missing or is disconnected. So even if you have data in real time and if your decisions are not real time, you're still operating in a delayed mode. So the goal is not just to modernize the data, but to enable real time decisioning on top of that data. That's the foundation for everything what we have discussed so far. So what we are not building is just a faster system. We are building a system that improves itself. Every time a decision is made, the system learns what worked, what didn't, and that learning feeds the next decisions automatically, which means over time, your decisions get better without any increasing effort. And this creates something very powerful, a compounding advantage, where your system becomes smarter, faster, and more effective every single day. Traditional systems stay the same unless someone improves them. Agentic systems, on the other hand, improve themselves continuously. And that's the real shift here, from static systems to self improving systems. And that is what creates long term competitive advantage. So now the natural question is, where do you actually start? Because this can sound like a big shift, complex, and difficult to implement. But on the other hand, the approach is quite simple. You don't start with everything at once. You start with one decision that is high impact and has high frequency. For example, it can be a pricing, it can be a customer engagement, it can be approval workflows, or it can be a resource allocation. The second step is to assess your readiness. Do you have the data available in real time? Do you have a unified view of that data? And can your systems act on decisions quickly? The third step is to enable decisioning. Define the logic, define the conditions, and define the actions. So the system knows what to do in each situation. And finally, scale. So once one decision works, expand it across more use cases, across more processes, across the organization. The goal is not to transform everything at once. The goal is to build momentum. So if you remember just one thing, it's this: think big, start small, scale fast. And that's how organizations move from data to decisions to autonomous execution. So at this point, you might be thinking, this makes sense, but how do we actually make this real inside your own organization? And this is where Hexacorp comes in. Our focus is not just on building data platforms or implementing tools, but our focus is enabling decisions, which means we don't look at data and AI and execution as separate layers. We look at them as one connected flow. In practice, this means using real time data, applying simple, effective intelligence, and enabling systems to act without a delay. And the goal here is not to make things more complex. It's actually the opposite, to simplify how decisions are made and executed. So, whether you are starting fresh or you already have a data platform, the approach remains the same. Pick the right decisions, enable it, and then scale it. Because ultimately, the value is not in the technology, it's in the decisions that technology enables. So, before we close, let me leave you with one thought. In the past, organizations competed on data, then they competed on insights. But now, that is no longer enough. Today, the real differentiator is decisions. Not who knows more, but who can act faster and at the right time. And what we discussed today is how that shift is happening from data to decisions to agentic action, where systems don't just support decisions, they make them and improve them continuously. And that is what defines data driven agentic commerce. So, with that, we'll wrap up here. So, we have covered the shift from data to decisions to agentic execution, and more importantly, how this can be applied in a practical way within your organization. If there's one takeaway, it's this: start with a decision, make it real time, and scale from there. So I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, even challenges that you're seeing in your organization. Also, if you want to see some of the demos what we have built for some of our clients, or you want to do a data readiness assessment or an AI readiness assessment, you can reach out to us. These are the details for you to reach out. And thank you again for your time and for being part of this session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ashwin. That was an interesting and wonderful session. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this session. For queries, please write to info@hexacorp.com. Please follow our LinkedIn page, and the link is been mentioned in the chat. So to explore our services, please visit www.hexacorp.com. Have a great day ahead. Stay tuned for the next. Thank you.